Are we ready? Okay. Nirashipshio, Sabal al-Khair wa ahlan bikum. Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, and welcome to today's ceremony commemorating the accession of the United Arab Emirates to the International Vaccine Institute. My name is Colin McCann. I am the Global Affairs Manager at IVI, and I'll be your moderator for this event. We begin today with welcoming remarks from Mr. George Bickerstaff, Chairperson of the IVI Board of Trustees, who joins us live from the United States. George?
Thank you, Colin. Your Excellency, Abdulla Saif Al Nuaimi, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the Republic of Korea. Your Excellency, Mr. Nasser Al Budar, Assistant Undersecretary for External Relation Affairs at the Ministry of Health and Prevention of the United Arab Emirates. Your Excellency, Dr. Jong-Koo, Ambassador for Global Health Security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea, and distinguished guests. As Chairperson of the IVI Board of Trustees, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to IVI in celebration of the UAE's ascension to the International Vaccine Institute. Thank you for joining us today. For 2 years, we have witnessed the world's rise to the challenge of overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. While the pandemic is far from over, our world today is remarkably different from 2019. New partnerships like COVAX have enabled the delivery of over 10 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses around the world, with roughly 18 million doses administered every day. Countries around the world have improved their contact tracing and containment abilities, and many countries are now securing vaccine manufacturing capabilities to ensure the access to life-saving vaccines. Despite such successes against COVID-19, we must still confront an enduring global tragedy: the millions of deaths caused every year by other vaccine-preventable infectious diseases. These devastating diseases have long been endemic to low and middle-income countries, but are too often ignored by large vaccine manufacturers. To address the lack of vaccines against neglected diseases, IVI has been working for over 25 years to discover, develop, and deliver safe, effective, and affordable vaccines for global health. The global effort to protect the world against the most vulnerable people from infectious diseases requires a diverse network of allies, as exemplified by IVI's 37 member states, collaborations with other countries, long-standing collaborations with WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, CEPI, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many others. As we welcome the UAE to IVI, let us recognize that the UAE has been a committed leader and partner for global health, aiding in the fight against COVID-19 with extensive support to COVAX and by being a long-term supporter of treatment and elimination programs in the fight against neglected tropical diseases and polio. As an IVI member state, the UAE has the opportunity to multiply its impact, joining us in our mission to develop new and innovative vaccines against infectious diseases for which none are available, building and expanding disease surveillance networks, and training the next generation of health leaders and researchers in the UAE and beyond. On behalf of everyone at IVI and our 37 member states, plus the WHO, and our collaborators around the world, it's an honor to raise the flag of the UAE to IVI today. We welcome you to the international community dedicated to vaccine discovery, development, and delivery for global health, and look forward to the impact we will build together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bickerstaff. We now invite His Excellency Abdulla Said Al Nuaimi, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the Republic of Korea, to deliver his remarks. Ambassador?
Honorable George Bickerstaff, Chairperson of IVI, His Excellency Lee Jong-Koo, Ambassador for Global Health Security, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Korea, Honorable Jerome Kim, Director General of IVI, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a great honor for me to be with you today at this special event. The event is meaningful for me as it celebrates my country's accession to the IVI. The UAE's accession to the IVI is in line with the role it has been playing in many aspects toward the international community. The UAE is an active member in a long list of international and regional organizations. As the global public health and infectious disease are concerned, the UAE has always been committed to a global standard in the provision of public health services, including the vaccine for eligible people. In response to the outbreak of the COVID-19, the UAE has made remarkable effort combating the pandemic. In addition, the UAE is noted as one of the leading countries in the vaccination against the virus. It's also one of the countries to reach out and extend a hand to help the countries in need in terms of the combating the virus or vaccination. The UAE accession to IVI will facilitate the cooperation and coordination between this esteemed institution and my country. The accession will help the UAE to reinforce and broaden its role and mission in field of the public vaccination at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now we invite His Excellency Jong-Koo, Ambassador for Global Health Security of the Republic of Korea, to deliver his remark.
Ambassador Abdulla Nuaimi of the UAE to the Republic of Korea, Mr. Nazra Al-Bodo, Assistant Under Secretary for External Relations Affairs and Health of the United Arab Emirates, Mr. George Bickerstaff, Chairperson of the IVI Board of the Trustees, Dr. Jerome, Director General of the IVI, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As an ambassador for global health security of the Republic of Korea, I am honored to deliver these remarks. I was also delighted to see that more state parties have joined the IVI since the last accession ceremony for Finland in 2020. Where I delivered my first remarks in this position. I'm especially delighted to hear UAE accession for two reasons. First, UAE's accession was finalized in February, right after President Moon's visit to UAE. Second, UAE is the first country from the Middle East to become state party of IVI. Even before joining the IVI, the UAE has always shown its interest in IVI's activities, including by participating at the 2018 Mars Symposium, co-organized the IVI and the WHO. Protracted COVID-19 pandemic has shown the world's preparedness and response is yet insufficient to deal with current and the possible future pandemics. To gear up ourselves to pandemic, international cooperation and solidarity is needed more than ever. I believe the UAE's accession will lend support to IVI to play a more significant role in pandemic response, catalyzing international cooperation and solidarities. The IVI is at the critical junctions, having two important new governance structure and to launch first ever IVI regional office in Europe. In this light, this new partnership with the UAE, United Arab Emirates will play the IVI extend to its scope and role and function as an international organizations. The Republic of Korea as host and donor countries for the IVI will also play its due part. With close cooperation with other partners, including the UAE, my government will continue to actively support the IVI's international affairs to help the world's most vulnerable people to live full, productive lives by accelerating R&D for clinical vaccines, including this pandemic influenza, COVID-19 outbreak. In conclusion, I look forward to cooperating with IVI and its all members to proceed vaccine solidarity with our brothers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Lee. The Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, Dr. Jerome Kim, will now deliver his presentation and remarks.
Thank you. Your Excellency Abdulla Saif Al Nuaimi, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the Republic of Korea, Your Excellency, Mr. Nasser Al-Badour, Assistant Undersecretary for External Relations Affairs at the Ministry of Health and Prevention of the United Arab Emirates, Your Excellency Dr. Jong-Koo, Ambassador for Global Health Security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Korea. It's our honor to receive you today to mark the UAE's accession to IVI. We're delighted to welcome the UAE as the 37th member state of IVI and anticipate a fruitful partnership with the Ministry of Health and Prevention. UAE is an exemplary model of the meaningful impact that countries can have on global health. As an example, in the fight against COVID-19, the UAE has fully vaccinated 96% of its population, achieving one of the highest COVID-19 vaccination rates in the world. Globally, the UAE is a significant funder of COVAX and has donated over 25 million COVID-19 vaccine doses, including 1 million doses of domestically manufactured Hyatt-Vax, a licensed version of the Sinopharm vaccine. New infrastructure networks based in the UAE include the Abu Dhabi Hope Consortium and the Dubai Vaccine Logistics Alliance that are facilitating COVAX's delivery of COVID-19 vaccines and medical supplies to low and middle income countries. In the global effort to protect the world's most vulnerable people against infectious diseases, the UAE's late founding father, Sheikh Zayed Al Nahyan, personally supported the Carter Center's campaign to eradicate guinea worm disease. This support for guinea worm eradication continues today and has been expanded to other neglected diseases, including malaria, polio, lymphatic filariasis, and onchocerciasis. The UAE's accession to IVI has come at an opportune time. In late 2021, IVI activated its new 5-year strategy, which includes amplifying our core activities and scaling our global footprint. IVI is currently partnering with over 24 vaccine developers around the world at every stage of COVID-19 vaccine development. IVI's work with companies developing COVID-19 vaccines may contribute 1.2 billion doses to the global COVAX facility, providing COVID-19 vaccines to people in low and middle income countries. In addition to the COVID-19 projects, IVI is working on its existing portfolio of vaccines for chikungunya, cholera, typhoid, shigella, non-typhoidal salmonella, schistosomiasis, group A streptococcus, hepatitis A, B, and E, human papillomavirus, tuberculosis, Japanese encephalitis, and as well on antimicrobial resistance, which is a looming pandemic, which may take 10 million cause 10 million deaths a year, and cost the world $100 trillion by 2050. We are also excited about the recent WHO announcement on the Global Biomanufacturing Training Hub here in South Korea, with the aim of improving access to vaccines and pharmaceutical goods for low and middle income countries. IVI will collaborate with the Korean government on this project as the operator of the Global Biointensive Training Course, which will provide 450 trainees per year with comprehensive know-how and the skills in the development of and production of biopharmaceuticals. Working with the UAE, we look forward to combining our strengths and efforts to have a greater impact on the development and delivery of vaccines for the world's most vulnerable people. And I'll go through this slide deck rather quickly so that we'll have time later on and time for questions if there are any. The pointer? Sorry. Okay, great. Oops. So our mission, to discover, develop, and deliver safe, effective, and affordable vaccines for global health, and our vision, to see developing countries free from suffering from infectious diseases. IVI now actually has a total workforce of 199, and this month will probably go over 200. We operate field programs in more than 28 countries around the world. IVI is recognized by the OECD as a international organization that can receive official development assistance. And as you know, as you've heard many people say, the UAE is now the 37th member state. These are testimonials from some of our key supporters, including Ban Ki-moon, Bill Gates, Richard Hatchett from CEPI, and Seth Berkley, the CEO of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. This is the new strategy, and you can see it looks a bit like a house. The roof of the house is the vision and the mission of IVI, which have remained the same since 1997. When you look at the pillars that support the roof, it's IVI as a research institute developing new vaccines and testing those vaccines in animals, then taking those vaccine products and testing them in humans, taking them through licensure and approval to World Health Organization approval, and ultimately to implementation and impact. At its base, IVI is an international organization. So you can see the three parts: Research Institute, Product Development Partnership, and International Organization, that really summarize what IVI does. The strategic enablers are around the corner. Number one, amplify the core and pursue opportunistic actions. Number two, scale the global footprint, which makes sense, I think, if you're a BCG consultant, but it really means make IVI an international organization. And finally, future-proof the governance, which is to take an organization that was set up 25 years ago, that really looked on itself a bit like a biotech company with a board of trustees, and to make it more truly international and to reflect the needs and desires of our stakeholders, which include, very importantly, the countries that are members of IVI. These are the flags of the countries that are associated with IVI. These are the places around the world where IVI is working. And this map changes daily. And you can see we have new programs in Latin America, many, many programs in Sub-Saharan Africa, and programs in South Asia and Southeast Asia as well. This is the growth of IVI from 2015 until 2022, which is a forecast. And you can see how the number of funders that IVI has in the first circle here has increased really dramatically by 2022. The funders have also changed. Where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was once responsible for over 50% of funding, you can see BMGF is now responsible for less than a quarter of IVI's funding. This reflects a significant growth in diversification of our portfolio. Where we used to work on cholera, typhoid, and dengue, we now work on a large number of other diseases. We call them neglected diseases, but really they're poverty-associated infectious diseases. Globally, these infectious diseases kill 4 to 5 million people a year. And to put that into perspective, Gavi tells us that if we were to fully vaccinate, take all the vaccines that we currently have and vaccinate children and populations around the world, we would save an additional 2.5 million lives every year, which is tremendous. Those neglected infectious diseases currently kill 4 to 5 million. And these aren't the COVIDs or the pandemic diseases. These are diseases of high burden that exist everywhere in the world and for which no vaccine solutions are available. These are the things that IVI does. We are an international organization that believes very strongly in epidemiology, because for many of the diseases we work on, there isn't a good idea of how significant a burden, for instance, of cholera, there is within a country. And many countries initially were very reluctant to report any cases of cholera because of the impact on business and international relations. But we're also an organization that does a lot of work in the laboratory, that does work in the field testing vaccines, and that registers vaccines initially, securing market authorization in the country of origin, and then moving on to World Health Organization pre-qualification, which allows the vaccines to be purchased by United Nations agencies and distributed around the world to achieve what we hope we do in the end, which is impact. This gives you a better idea. Actually, it's broken down into all the little things that IVI as an institute does. So if you look at our 199 people, every day, these are the vaccines we work on, down here, divided into discovery, development, and delivery. These are the steps that we take to take the vaccines from the laboratory all the way through licensure. And it's a very complicated slide, and it gets to the capabilities that this small international organization has to move vaccines forward from the beginning to the end. But IVI's impact is not only on the vaccines that we develop. Where IVI is located, so in this case in Korea, we've been very important and an integral part of the discussions with the Korean government to advance Korean vaccine manufacturing capability. And you can see here, and I think you'll remember that in 2010, we had a pandemic of influenza, an influenza pandemic. And the Korean government was notified by the American government that vaccine made by American vaccine manufacturers could be taken for use in America. So contracted vaccine that had been purchased by Korea for use in its own population might not have been delivered because the Americans had the authority to use vaccine first for its own people. That's vaccine nationalism. That's the original definition of vaccine nationalism. So Korea took that and decided that it probably wasn't a good idea to be so dependent on other countries for such a critical resource. And so in 2014, I remember the original discussions around Vaccine 3.0. Korea should be 80% self-sufficient in vaccines and should become the number 5 vaccine manufacturer in the world. And at that time, Korea was number 10 or 11 in terms of vaccine manufacturing. It was a difficult proposition, but by 2016, the Korean government had put $250 million into Vaccine 3.0, which built 2 large pilot plants, one in Andong, one in Hwasun, and also a vaccine research center with KNIH. By 2018, a fund provided by the Korean government, the Gates Foundation, and Korean manufacturers allowed vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics for global health to be funded, to take things out of the laboratory over what we call the first valley of death and into translational research, that is testing in humans. That's actually one of the most critical gaps, the translation gap, getting things out of the lab and into human testing. And it really would be a spur to innovation. So the Wright Fund actually last year was doubled in size by contributions from the Gates Foundation and the Korean government. And actually now we've gone from 5 companies to 11 companies. So again, the number of companies that are participating and providing funding has also increased. By 2020, it became clear that if Korea was going to be a major vaccine manufacturing power, that it needed the academic background, the resources, the trained people who were able to take or develop innovative vaccine products and to work on vaccine platforms. And so this was called Vital Korea, and it was a $200 million 7-year effort that really prioritizes research and development at a more basic level at the universities and with IVI as a partner to bring new platforms in that will allow innovation to take place in the future. And then finally last year, at the end of the year, the Korean government approved the K-Vaccine Hub, which was $2 billion to make Korea 80% self-sufficient in vaccines and the number 5 vaccine manufacturer in the world by 2025. And again, IVI is participating in this primarily as the training hub, both for training within Korea initially and then also for training for 300 positions from outside of Korea. And the Korean government has, as a part of the agreement with WHO, has agreed to support the costs of the training in Korea. So again, a really remarkable commitment to not only training Koreans, but to training staff from all over the world in vaccine manufacturing. So let's start here, because what IVI does starts with need. For instance, we needed a safe and effective cholera vaccine. IVI worked in the laboratory to develop that vaccine, transferred it to a developing country vaccine manufacturer, which creates now the initial supply. But we also did clinical development and worked with them on regulatory approval and World Health Organization pre-qualification. At the same time, now remembering that a vaccine doesn't work by itself, a vaccine has to be used. And in order to use a vaccine, a country needs a recommendation from the World Health Organization. It needs to have often vaccine provided at very low cost or no cost by organizations like Gavi. It needs to get approval by National Immunization Technical Advisory Group. So that group of doctors and vaccine experts who recommends, for instance, that the UAE implement vaccination against pneumonia. And then IVI works with all the people who provide vaccine to countries. And our reason for doing that is we really need to, once we have the vaccine, develop what we call effectiveness data or real world evidence. And in the COVID pandemic, the UAE has been one of the leading countries in providing information on the effectiveness, the real world evidence that the vaccines that are being used are actually working and doing what we expect them to do. And it's only after all these things are done that IVI's true purpose is clear. Impact, lives saved, healthier families, improved economic growth, all known to be benefits of vaccination. And this is just an example using the cholera vaccine. We start with, we start here, identifying the burden of cholera. By 2006, the Gates Foundation had funded a cholera vaccine development effort. That resulted in technology transfers to Shanta, U Biologics, and Incepta, and then an additional one now, which is not shown here, to an Indian government manufacturer called Bibcol. Some programs to test the effectiveness, the real-world evidence around cholera vaccine, and then it became clear that there were some deficiencies in the vaccine. Perhaps we could make it more cheaply. Perhaps that would allow us to increase the number of doses that were being manufactured. Perhaps there were ways that we could improve the vaccine so it performed better in children under 5. And so we've secured additional funding for all of these efforts through collaboration with partners around the world. And this is just an example using cholera of what IVI does in order to get vaccines over the finish line. I think everyone knows now, because we talked about it so much during the COVID outbreak, that might take $1 billion and 10 years to develop a vaccine. And so this gives you an example of how long it took IVI. Starting in 2007, the cholera vaccine, $28 million, 3 pre-qualified products. The typhoid conjugate vaccine, this is the amount the Gates Foundation provided, $33 million. We are going to return $4 million to them, unspent. We will have, hopefully by the beginning of next year, 2 pre-qualified products, one from SK, which is a Korean company, and one from Biopharma, an Indonesian company, of this typhoid conjugate vaccine. And so these were all technology transfers from IVI to companies around the world to make the vaccines, because we don't manufacture vaccines ourselves. We're working now on something we call vaccine number 3, which started with a small internal investment of IVI funding, and then now is being supported largely by the Wellcome Trust and includes actually a manufacturer now, SK Bioscience. These are some of the campaigns that IVI staff have completed, supported by a number of different organizations, some of it charitable contributions from different organizations, and then also funding from KOICA. These are some of our 160 partners. These are IVI benefits to member states. And again, I think you're very well familiar with this. This was discussed previously. Participation in IVI governance. Now, typically the funding states have a seat on the board. We are, as of next year, going to start allowing countries where IVI works to participate in board governance. We think this is very important because we have to reflect the needs of all of the states that are participating in IVI's international organization. We have something called a collaborating center, and let's see, one has been set up in Ghana, one has been set up in Madagascar, and one hopefully will soon be set up in India and perhaps in Thailand. And what the collaborating center does is it allows people designated by the government to work with IVI or to come to IVI and to learn what we do at a more practical level. We also have an annual vaccinology course, which has now been going. There have been 20 versions of it. Last year, 3,000 people attended the course, and actually, it was online for the first time. I think this year we'll try a hybrid format. It's a 1-week course. It's very well attended, and usually the ratings of the course are very high. That's going to be in addition to the training that we've committed to do under the K-Vaccine Training Hub. So our response to COVID. You know, IVI does not have its own COVID vaccine. And we did this on purpose back in February of 2020. We know that companies have difficulty working with an organization that has its own vaccine because they are always suspicious that we might not give every effort to make their vaccine successful. So what we told people was that we aren't going to make our own vaccine, but we will help you make your vaccine and help you to understand whether it was generating the correct protective responses, help test it in humans, help with effectiveness trials, generating real-world data. And so currently, the vaccines that we have in phase 3 trials, those companies have committed over 1 billion doses of COVID vaccines to COVAX, which is roughly 20% of the committed total, if the vaccines are shown to be safe and efficacious. And so our contribution, again, is not an IVI vaccine, but support for over 24 companies, over 24 companies that have committed vaccine and are committed to developing vaccines for COVID-19. So thank you very much.